He lunged at the pilot with no warning. A split second before boarding, the dog growled, barked, and blocked his path, snarling like he'd just sensed a bomb. The man froze. Security froze. Everyone thought it was a malfunction, a bad day, a disobedient canine. But the truth? That single bark stopped a plane and uncovered something that would shake the entire world. What did he smell? Why that man? And how did a dog once rejected for being too slow see what trained agents didn't? This is the story of the moment. Instincts overruled protocol. Tell us where you're watching from. Which second gave you chills? Like if you believe animals know more than we think. Subscribe if you're ready to follow the nose that saved 1,000 lives. The winter air bit at Darius Cole's cheeks as he stepped out of his patrol SUV and into the pre-dawn bustle of JFK International Airport. New York City never slept, but there was a particular rhythm to airports before sunrise. Steelabirds rumbling on the tarmac, sleep-deprived travelers dragging suitcases behind them, and fluorescent lights humming like a nervous pulse. Darius tugged his TSA patrol jacket tighter around him and gave a quick nod to the gate officer stationed at Terminal 4. "Morning," he muttered. The man nodded back, too caffeinated to talk. Beside Darius, the sleek figure of a black and tan German Shepherd moved in perfect sync, eyes scanning, nose twitching. Shadow was alert, silent, coiled like a spring that hadn't decided if it needed to jump. 3 years together and still Shadow never barked unnecessarily. That dog didn't waste energy on anything but truth. They entered through the lower security corridor toward the international crew area. Darius's boots echoed against the tiled floor. The leash in his hand barely taut. "Easy boy," he whispered. Shadow gave a low, almost imperceptible huff in response. Most handlers gave commands with whistles or calls. Darius, he and Shadow worked in silence, of reading intent not in voice but breath, posture, the tilt of a head, and Shadow, for all his unpredictable beginnings, had mastered that language. Shadow had been a near discard, too hesitant, too analytical. "Doesn't alert fast enough," the Canine Training Center had said. "He's thinking too much." But Darius saw something in that hesitation. Something familiar. Not fear calculation. It was the same delay he himself used before clearing a doorway overseas. Not slow, just precise. That's what bonded them. Perhaps a quiet suspicion of the world. A slowness born of surviving it. As they approached Terminal B, the early surge of airport life swelled around them. An Emirates crew walked past in burgundy and beige. A family with twin toddlers fought over spilled juice. Somewhere, a gate agent was already yelling about boarding zones. Just another morning. Darius scanned faces. Shadow sniffed air. Their routine was mechanical fluid, a ritual of protection. And then, it happened. Shadow froze. They had just passed Gate 29, where the Heathrow-bound transatlantic flight would depart in under an hour. A pilot, tall, square-shouldered, clean uniform pressed to perfection, strode confidently through the side crew lane. Name tag Captain Alan Voss. Age maybe late 40s. Neat salt and pepper hair under a regulation cap. Nothing stood out. Nothing except Shadow's The German Shepherd halted, stiffened, and planted his front paws wide. His hackles raised not in fear, but in precision. A growl began deep in his chest, rumbling like a storm caught in the bones. Darius instinctively shortened the leash. "Shadow, heel," he said calmly. No movement. The dog was locked in, eyes Grias focused on the pilot. Darius hadn't heard that tone in months. Captain Voss glanced down, one brow arched in polite confusion. "Everything okay, officer?" His voice was smooth, professional. His posture remained relaxed. But Shadow didn't buy it. He lunged, not wildly but directly into Voss's path, barking again with unwavering focus. "Shallow," Darius barked, pulling him back. The leash held taut. Back. Passengers nearby slowed. Heads turned. Phones raised. "Control your dog," Voss snapped, taking a step to the left. Shadow mirrored it right. Shadow mirrored again. He was blocking actively, deliberately, the kind of behavior trained into canine units only when they've locked onto a threat. Darius's hand tightened around the leash. Shadow was no rookie. If he was alerting, something was real. But it made no sense. Voss was a pilot, senior crew, clear, clean. The TSA supervisor on duty, Monica Greer, jogged over. headset dangling, expression tight. "What's going on here, Cole?" Darius didn't look away from Shadow or Voss. "My dog is signaling hard on the captain." Captain Voss's jaw tightened. "This is absurd. I have a flight to London in less than 50 minutes. I've flown for 20 years and never been stopped by a dog." "Apologies, sir," Greer began diplomatically. "But we need to follow protocol." "There is no protocol that lets a damn mutt interrogate a pilot," Voss snapped. Shadow barked again, sharp, insistent. Then he lunged slightly, trying to close the distance, not to bite, to get close, to confirm. Darius yanked him back. "Captain," he said firmly, eyes narrowing, "we're going to need to ask you to step aside for additional screening." "What?" "My partner has never had a false alert in 3 years, not once." Captain Voss's face flushed red, but it wasn't anger that Darius saw behind those eyes. It was fear, subtle, controlled, but real. The crowd around them thickened. Shadow's bark echoed through the terminal. Darius's jaw clenched as the murmurs around them swelled. Shadow wasn't letting up, not for commands, not for correction, not even for the leash tightening in Darius's fist. The dog's instincts were locked in, raw and unyielding, and as Darius had learned the hard way in Kandahar, when Shadow went still like this, something was truly, deeply wrong. The moment Captain Voss shifted his weight slightly, just enough to try stepping around, Shadow lunged not for flesh but with his snout angled sharply toward the left side of Voss's chest. There was a brief scuffle, and then, unmistakably, the sound of fabric tearing. Gasps burst from the gathering crowd. Monica Greer's headset slid off her ear as she stepped between them, arms up like a referee. "Darius, call him off," she hissed. But Darius didn't move. He wasn't restraining Shadow anymore, not because he couldn't, but because he wouldn't. The German Shepherd's teeth had not gone for skin, only the outer seam of the jacket, and as he released it, the strip he'd torn away fluttered loosely from Voss's shoulder, and there just a glimpse thin, taut, unnaturally smooth stitching along the inside of the lapel, almost imperceptible if not for the subtle sheen of a different thread. Voss's expression cracked for half a breath. Not outrage, not shocked, recognition. Darius stepped forward, voice low and steady. "Supervisor Greer, I'm invoking TSA Regulation Delta 9 for secondary screening, under K9 alert." Greer hesitated, eyes flicking from Voss to Shadow, then to the growing cluster of passengers filming with phones. "Darius, that regulation is for untagged luggage and anonymous cargo. He's a pilot. My partner just signaled harder than he ever has. That regulation doesn't make exceptions based on rank. He's a senior crew member with Delta clearance, for God's sake," she said, lowering her voice further, tension simmering beneath the surface. "You want to embarrass the entire TSA over what dog intuition?" "No," Darius said flatly, not blinking. "I'm trusting what I know." Shadows never missed. Greer blew out a breath and turned to Voss. "Captain, I apologize, but we'll need you to step into the secondary screening room. It'll only take a moment." Voss's mouth tightened into a thin, pale line. He gave a short, clipped nod and adjusted his cap. But the way his fingers trembled didn't escape Darius's watchful eyes. Shadow was still fixated, following each movement as if expecting something to snap. The private screening room wasn't large, just a metal table, 2 chairs, and a fluorescent ceiling light that hummed faintly with a flickering edge. Voss stood near the far wall while the appointed screening officer, TSA veteran Marcus Hill, reviewed the pilot's ID and license. "Credentials check out," Hill said, voice monotone. 15 years active, clean background. "Let's check the uniform," Darius said before Voss could reach for his phone, back at first. Voss's nostrils flared, but he slipped off the outerwear and set it on the table with a thud. Shadow didn't growl this time. He walked slowly, purposefully, and began sniffing along the seams. Darius watched the dog's every twitch. At the left breast pocket, Shadow paused. His ears flicked back, front paw raising slightly before he placed it gently but firmly on the edge of the jacket. A subtle but clear signal. Darius reached over and began running his fingers along the same area. Nothing at first. Then there it was. A patch where the stitching felt tighter, smoother, just a fraction different than the rest of the lining. "We need a scanner," Darius said. "Portable X-ray or EM imaging." Greer, now present in the room with folded arms and a frown carved into her face, tapped her radio and called it in. Minutes passed. Tension thickened the air like humidity before a thunderstorm. Voss remained silent, arms crossed, jaw locked in place. Shadow sat beside the jacket unmoving. When the scanner team arrived, they positioned the equipment above the lapel, adjusting the angle and contrast until a silhouette emerged on the screen. A flat, rectangular outline, barely visible even under enhanced imaging, pressed into the lining like a ghost inside the fabric. "What is that?" Greer asked. "Not an ID card, it's embedded. No access SIM, looks like an integrated microcomponent," the technician offered. "Could be a passive chip, could be more." Darius stepped forward, remembering an incident 3 months ago in Berlin. An intercepted diplomat's blazer had carried a similar component, but this one was smaller, more concealed, less traceable. Voss finally spoke. "It's nothing, some flight jackets have embedded RFID strips, security badges. It's standard issue." "Then you won't mind if we remove it," Darius said. Voss opened his mouth to protest, then shut it. Darius motioned to the technician, who carefully cut open the seam. Inside, sewn behind a false fabric layer, was a wafer-thin strip of metallic film, no bigger than a matchstick, etched with minute circuitry and a dull copper coil. The technician tilted it under the light. "Definitely not standard issue. This thing has its own power node. We'll need to run a spectrum test," he added. "If it's emitting or receiving." Greer turned sharply toward Voss. "Captain, care to explain what exactly this is doing in your uniform?" The man didn't answer. His fingers were clenched, white-knuckled at his sides. Darius studied him, breathing slow, heart thumping steady. "Sir," Hill said, stepping forward, "we're going to hold your ID while we complete this analysis. You're not under arrest, but you will remain in this room." As Hill moved to collect the rest of the uniform, Shadow growled again low, teeth bared, his eyes fixated not on the jacket anymore, but on Voss's right wrist, where sweat had begun to pool just below his watch. Voss reached toward his sleeve instinctively. Shadow stepped forward again, not aggressive, intentional, focused, like he knew exactly what was coming next. Darius took a half step back, his fingers brushing the safety clasp on his holster. He didn't draw. "Not yet. Don't move," he said quietly. "Don't touch that watch." Voss froze. The sterile silence of the TSA holding room was broken only by the muted hum of the overhead lights and the quiet clatter of analysis equipment, still scanning the microchip sewn into the lapel of Captain Voss's uniform. Darius stood near the door, arms crossed, eyes locked on the man in question, while Shadow sat low beside him, body tense, gaze fixed not on the jacket now being dissected, but on Voss himself. His nose twitching, ears pricked, reading every shallow breath and micro-shift of posture with unsettling clarity. Voss hadn't said a word in 10 minutes. He hadn't needed to. His silence was more telling than any excuse he might have invented, and the sweat dampening the edge of his collar, despite the chill in the room, betrayed the pressure mounting behind that calm exterior. Greer stepped back into the room with a man in a dark federal windbreaker, FBI Special Agent Victor Ramirez. His expression tight with the kind of urgency reserved only for situations that had already spiraled beyond protocol. He carried a tablet under one arm and his eyes locked on Voss the moment he entered. "We need to run facial recognition immediately," Ramirez said, tapping the device. "Here's a potential identity mismatch reported from Interpol this morning. Something about flagged biometrics." Darius exchanged a glance with Greer, then nodded. "Do it," he said, his voice steady but clipped. Ramirez angled the tablet, pointing it discreetly at Voss. A soft chime confirmed image capture, and the program began running. The room felt like it held its breath. 30 seconds later, the tablet dinged again, louder this time. Ramirez stared at the result, then looked up slowly, all the color draining from his face. "Jesus," he muttered. "Alan Voss is dead. Found in a hotel room in Cyprus 11 months ago, identified by dental records. Body burned beyond recognition until now. We didn't realize the identity had been stolen." Greer blinked. "So who the hell is this?" Ramirez turned the screen toward them. Interpol match 98% confidence. The name on the screen read, Andrei Nikir. Below it, the words, Level 1 threat, suspected operative for Ascension Network, wanted for multiple counts of terrorism, explosives trafficking, and 2 assassinations. Darius felt a cold chill slide down his spine. He stepped closer, placing himself subtly between Nikiru and the others. "Andre Nikiru," he said slowly, "that's who you really are." The man didn't respond. His jaw clenched tighter, his body language coiling inwards like a spring preparing to snap. Ramirez leaned forward. "You're impersonating a dead pilot, carrying a hidden micro-uniform device inside a flight uniform, minutes from boarding a transatlantic flight. We already have enough to hold you under federal terrorism statutes." Still no answer. But Darius saw it flicker in Nikiru's eyes, like a cornered animal, calculating risk versus opportunity. Then Nikiru's right hand twitched, just slightly, moving toward the inside of his jacket where his phone had been placed earlier, now tucked neatly into the breast pocket. "It was enough, don't," Darius barked, but the man was already moving. The speed of it was startling. Nikiru's fingers shot toward the jacket pocket, yanking at the fabric in a single, desperate motion. Shadow exploded off the ground like a thunderclap, teeth bared, growl tearing through the room like a siren. The German Shepherd lunged, intercepting the motion mid-air with a precision that defied physics. His jaws snapped shut just inches from Nikiru's wrist, clamping down hard. The man screamed. The phone skittered from his grip, sliding across the floor toward Ramirez. Chaos erupted. Darius grabbed Nikiru and slammed him against the wall, cuffing his free arm in one practiced motion, while Shadow held his bite, not to maul, just to contain. Gray swept in, grabbing the fallen phone and immediately yanked the battery. "It was unlocked," she shouted. "He was trying to send something, some kind of trigger." Ramirez's fingers flew across the screen of the disabled device. "No apps open, but there's a transmission timestamp. He was about to broadcast something shortwave signal, maybe, or a remote detonation," Darius muttered. Shadow released his hold at Darius's low command and stepped back, blood on his muzzle but calm, panting. Nikiru dropped to his knees, eyes burning with defiance. "He's already begun." "What has?" Ramirez demanded, crouching down beside him. "What's been activated?" But Nikiru only smiled, a slow, cold, knowing smile. Greer swore and turned toward the tech team. "Check that microchip now. I want to know what the hell we just pulled out of his jacket." "On it," one of the analysts responded. Signal analysis started. "It's not just a passive transmitter, it has some sort of embedded encryption and frequency pattern." "Encryption?" Darius asked, his voice growing darker. "So it could be a relay point, or a trigger. Worse," the technician replied grimly, "it could be both." Ramirez stood up, already calling someone through his headset. "Notify Homeland, we need to ground every flight this man could have had contact with and get facial recognition running on the entire crew manifest for Flight 8862. Darius stared at Nikiru, now restrained, his lips split and one eye swelling. "Why this flight?" he asked. "Why London?" Nikiru said quietly, his voice suddenly calm. "It's the altitude, it's the message. Collapse a system in mid-air and it echoes louder than any bomb on the ground." "What system?" "Trust," Niru whispered. "Your security's an illusion. Your dogs are better than your machines. But they're still just animals." Darius glanced at Shadow, who now sat back down beside the wall, eyes trained on Nikiru with the stillness of a hunter. "He's not just an animal," Darius said softly. "He's the reason you're in cuffs right now." Nikiru's smile faded. "For now," he said, "but the clock was never set here. You're late, you just don't know it yet." Outside the room, footsteps thundered toward them. Another TSA officer burst in, breathless. "You've got an issue," she panted. "Flight 8862's gate crew says there's a delay. They're reporting a malfunction with the co-pilot's seat. Maintenance crew says it's not a mechanical error. There's something unusual lodged in the adjustment rail." Darius turned sharply to Ramirez. "Send a team now." Then, without hesitation, he looked at Shadow. "We're going too." The moment Darius stepped onto Flight 8862, his boots clicked against the narrow jet bridge with a weight he hadn't felt since Afghanistan, where every footfall might awaken death. Every silence could hide a trigger. Inside the aircraft, the cold fluorescence of the cabin lights bathed everything in surgical precision. Passengers had already been disembarked and the cabin crew evacuated. The Boeing 777 now stood hollow and sterile like a metal lung waiting to collapse. A team of 4 explosive ordnance specialists worked in tandem with TSA tactical agents. Every movement rehearsed, deliberate, and steeped in caution. Darius gave a sharp whistle, not to command but to check Shadow's readiness. The dog responded with a low huff and stepped onto the aircraft behind him. Every muscle engaged, nose twitching as he took in the scent of the plane's recycled air, the oil in the cabin controls, the faint trace of nylon from the crew uniforms, until something made him pause. The cockpit loomed ahead like a sanctum of silence. 2 seats, dozens of panels, endless switches and hidden compartments. An engineer's dream, a saboteur's playground. Ramirez gestured to the lead technician, who crouched beside the pilot's seat and removed the lower panel from the co-pilot's footwell. According to gate staff, maintenance found irregular pressure in the seat motor's return mechanism, the man explained. The replacement tech couldn't access the hydraulic rail, something was jammed deep inside. Shadow stepped forward, his ears perked, his gaze locked on the seat. Darius's grip on the leash loosened instinctively. "Go," he whispered. The shepherd leapt forward, careful but direct, and sniffed along the base of the seat. Then he froze. With excruciating slowness, Shadow lowered his muzzle into the gap where the technician had removed the panel. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just stopped moving entirely. "Back," Darius called quietly, and Shadow withdrew. The technician lowered a flexible camera scope into the slot, guiding the lens deeper into the adjustment rail with surgical precision. The monitor blinked, blurry at first, then focused on a thin metal casing bolted flush inside the mechanical housing. Almost invisible to the naked eye, wires led to a cylindrical core, no larger than a vitamin bottle. Pressure activated, likely altitude act. Pressure activated, likely altitude act. This isn't amateur work. This thing's been engineered with low metal composites to avoid detection. "Trigger mechanism?" Ramirez asked. The technician zoomed in. "Looks barometric. Would have activated somewhere after 33,000 feet, just about mid-Atlantic. Explosion point right under the flight deck. Instant loss of controls. Breach in the fuselage. The whole cockpit would have torn open." Darius's pulse thudded in his ears. He crouched beside the seat, staring into the compartment as though it might answer the 1,000 questions now burning through his brain. Shadow sat nearby, but his ears hadn't relaxed. He was still staring not at the seat, but at the overhead panel. "You're not done, are you?" Darius murmured, rising slowly. Shadow didn't respond, only turned and padded toward the left side of the cabin, where the climate control switches sat embedded beneath a sleek beige panel just above the co-pilot station. Darius followed, motioning for the technicians to stand back. Shadow sniffed the corner where plastic met metal, then looked back at Darius and gave a short, firm bark. Ramirez stepped up behind him. "Again? He's signaling something hidden," Darius said. "Probably smaller than the first." Shadow doesn't false alert. One of the technicians pulled a narrow screwdriver and began to carefully unscrew the faceplate of the air control console. As the panel came off, a faint clicking sound echoed into the silence. Everyone stopped moving. The technician's hands froze mid-air. "It was that. Hold position," Darius ordered. The technician gently slid the console outward. Inside was a hollow cavity filled with bundled wires, and wedged into the very back corner, nearly flush with the housing, a device about the size of a car key. "Microtransmitter," he muttered. "Insulated. This might have been a failsafe." Ramirez leaned in. "Failsafe how?" "Trigger redundancy," the tech replied. "If the primary device failed or was disabled, this could have sent a signal from inside the aircraft to another receiver. Or maybe relayed its own detonation. Secondary transmitter inside the climate system," Darius said aloud, the words tasting like metal in his mouth. "Hell, half the mechanics wouldn't think to check there." Shadow gave another soft growl and pressed his paw gently against the console's edge. "He wants us to keep going," Darius muttered. "There's more." The technician slid the secondary device into a lead container and sealed it. Darius reached down and scratched Shadow behind the ear. "Good boy," he whispered, "but let's keep going." Ramirez turned to Greer, who had just arrived on the bridge. "We have 2 confirmed devices. The main bomb under the pilot's seat, a hidden transmitter in the control panel. This isn't just sabotage, it's architecture." "How many more?" she asked, voice tight. "We don't know," Ramirez said. But I don't think the plane was the only thing compromised. Darius glanced toward the rear of the aircraft. He said it wasn't about London, it was about the altitude. A message: if you kill a plane mid-air, you kill certainty. Ramirez finished. The world starts asking where else they're vulnerable. Greer looked at Darius. You think this is part of something bigger? Darius didn't answer right away. He was watching Shadow, who had begun to move again, this time toward the emergency exit door near the galley. The dog's pace had slowed. His head tilted. Something had changed. The lights inside the federal holding room cast a pale, unforgiving sheen over Andre Nirsu's bruised face. The cuffed hands resting limply on the metal table, and the faint smear of blood across his temple from the earlier struggle with Shadow. Darius stood at one corner of the room, arms crossed, his posture unmoved, eyes locked onto the man across from him like a loaded rifle waiting to fire. Shadow lay at Darius's feet, unmoving but wide-eyed, his body language tight with the temp. Ramirez leaned against the wall near the door, the silence between them punctuated only by the hum of electronics and the slow drip of tension. You want to talk now? Darius asked, his voice flat, drained of any pretense of patience. Because right now we have 2 devices recovered from your assigned aircraft, one of which could have taken down 243 lives over the Atlantic. That doesn't scream innocent pilot to me. Andre exhaled, slow and deliberate, then finally lifted his eyes. Innocence was never part of my role, he said, his accent faint, nondescript voice engineered to blend in. I wasn't here to complete the mission, I was here to begin it. Darius's brow furrowed. What the hell does that mean? Andre's lip curved into a cold smirk. I'm not the payload, he said. I'm just the ignition, the one who lights the match. Who's holding the bomb? Ramirez snapped, stepping forward now, the tension in his shoulders unmistakable. Andre turned to him slowly. You think this is about one plane, one city? No, you're thinking too small. That's your mistake. Darius stepped closer. Then tell us, because right now we've already grounded every aircraft connected to your flight crew. If there's more, we need to move. Andrew's smile faded, and in its place came a tone more serious, almost reverent. There are 2 more, he said. Both pilots, one departed Frankfurt this morning, another is preparing to board in Paris within the hour. Their uniforms are clean, their identities are real, their aircrafts are prepped. Names? Ramirez demanded. Flight numbers, aircraft types, everything. Andre Sager, you don't know the details. That's the brilliance of it. Compartmentalization, isolation. One hand never sees the other. Darius narrowed his eyes. But you know where they're going. Andre nodded. One's headed to JFK, the other to Chicago O'Hare. Their arrivals were timed to coincide within a 3-hour window. Greer, listening from the hallway, was already relaying the information over a secure line. Get Frankfurt Control and Charles de Gaulle on the line now. Cross-check every pilot assigned to US-bound flights in the last 12 hours. Inside, Ramirez stepped forward. So what's the goal? You just want 3 planes to blow up? Chaos, headlines. Andre leaned forward slowly, his eyes colder now. No, he said. Detonation isn't the objective. Panic is. It's never been about death, it's about collapse. We're not targeting people, we're targeting trust. Darius froze, those words burning themselves into his thoughts. Explain, he said. Andre's tone deepened, more composed now. Do you understand what happens when 3 international flights operated by trusted airlines, flown by trusted crew, are suddenly compromised within the same day? What happens when the bombs don't go off but are found last minute, each one hidden deeper than the last? The system freezes. More than that, Andre replied. You paralyze the industry, ground every flight, interrogate every crew member. You make passengers question the scanners, the protocols, the dogs, the humans. You make them believe nowhere is safe, even when no one dies. Darius took a step back, his stomach nodding. You're manufacturing a failure of faith. Exactly, Andre whispered. You don't need explosives to blow apart a civilization. You just need fear. Fear that spreads faster than fact, that jumps from newsfeed to airport to embassy. Once trust is gone, the structure crumbles on its own. So this is a proof of concept, Ramirez said. You're testing the system. You're showing it's already broken, Andre corrected. A Ascension doesn't attack from the outside. We rot you from within. At that moment, an agent entered with a secure tablet, eyes wide. You need to see this. Frankfurt flagged a pilot on Lufthansa Flight 234, en route to JFK. Facial recognition just matched his photo to a known alias in the Ascension database. Ramirez snatched the tablet, scrolling fast. Confirmed. ETA to JFK 2 hours and 12 minutes. Aircraft type A340. Another agent rushed in. And, from Paris we have a flagged captain on United Flight 178 to Chicago. Also confirmed match. Both flights are in the air. Greer's voice crackled over Darius's radio. Orders just came down from Homeland. Evacuate both destination terminals. Prepare for emergency intervention. They want both planes rerouted. Darius turned to Andre. How did they get through vetting, clearance? Secure crew lists. You tell me, Andre said softly. Maybe your systems were never that secure to begin with. Maybe they were built to look secure but not to be. The shadow growled then, low and unmistakable. Andre turned his head slightly, eyes meeting the dog's for a brief second. He knows, Andre murmured. I saw it in him, the moment he stopped me. Ramirez looked up from the tablet. Darius, we're gonna need you and Shadow on the runway when that Lufthansa flight lands. They're rerouting it to a remote tarmac strip. No one gets on that plane until you sweep it. Darius gave a short nod, already moving, already dialing into something deeper, something instinctual. Then we move now, he said. If there's even a sliver of what we found on that first plane, there will be. Ramirez cut in. This time, they won't leave the trigger behind. The low rumble of jet engines echoed across the tarmac as the rerouted Lufthansa A340 approached JFK's secured landing strip, escorted by military-grade interceptors glinting silver against the cloud-choked sky. Emergency vehicles lined the perimeter. Agents in full tactical gear clustered along the shadows of hangars, radios whispering in tense loops. Darius stood near the operations command vehicle, the wind snapping his jacket collar against his throat. But he hardly noticed. Shadow was beside him, lean and focused, amber eyes watching the incoming plane with the same intense silence Darius had seen on the battlefield right before a breach, right before the world split open. Inside the command trailer, Ramirez hunched over the FBI's portable analysis terminal, fingers gliding across touchscreen interfaces as facial match data, materials reports, and historical training records scrolled across the feed. One file blinked red, flagged for restricted content. This just popped up, he muttered. Darius stepped inside, the warmth of the trailer hitting his skin like static. Let me see it. Ramirez nodded and opened the report. The screen displayed Shadow's full training dossier from the Homeland K-9 Tactical Academy in San Antonio. 2 years ago, Ramirez said, he was dropped from standard certification during Phase 3. Reason given: repeated false alerts during chemical scent testing, specifically during a scenario simulating airport cargo intercepts. Darius frowned. That's not possible. Shadow doesn't alert without reason. Here's the kicker, Ramirez replied. He tapped a string of data. The chemical signature Shadow kept flagging wasn't on the controlled substance list at the time. No match in the national database. The trainers called it a non-hazardous lab residue and chalked it up to oversensitivity. Darius's jaw tightened. Run that chemical again, he said. Cross-end with what we found in the detonator from the cockpit. Ramirez input the command. The system hesitated for a beat, then pinged. MASH found 96% similarity. That compound, Ramirez said slowly, eyes widening, is in the adhesive sealant used on the barometric bomb casing. The same compound Andre's team used to line their electronics, probably to avoid chemical flagging. Darius leaned back, heart pounding. So Shadow wasn't wrong, he was early. Ramirez nodded grimly. He flagged a chemical no one understood at the time. He saw the threat before the rest of us knew it existed. Darius looked out the window, his gaze falling on Shadow waiting patiently outside. Tail still, breath slow, a statue carved from memory. I owe him more than my badge, Darius said, voice barely above a whisper. He saved my life before I even understood what he was trying to tell me. The memory hit like a punch to the chest. 3 years ago, Kandahar. Darius had been seconded to a multi-branch task force investigating weapons smuggling routes in a border town turned battleground. He'd just finished sweeping a convoy checkpoint with a rookie team when Shadow, then newly assigned to his unit, began barking wildly at the back of their armored SUV. At first, Darius had thought the dog was reacting to leftover residue from the Afghan livestock markets nearby, but the barking intensified. Shadow jumped, slammed his paws against the rear door, teeth bared, growling as if the metal itself were alive. Against protocol, Darius opened the door, and that's when he smelled it. Not smoke, not fuel, something synthetic, sweet and metallic like rotting fruit coated in battery acid. He never forgot that scent, and he never got to ask more, because before he could react, Shadow yanked his sleeve with enough force to drag him off balance, pulling him clear just seconds before the entire vehicle went up in a silent white flash. The blast had been rigged beneath the undercarriage, triggered remotely. 2 others hadn't been so lucky. The investigation later classified it as a chemical anomalous IED, with no traceable explosive compound found in conventional databases. Only now, staring at the compound report on Ramirez's tablet, did Darius realize the truth. It had been the same material. That bomb 3 years ago, he said, voice low and filled with awe. It wasn't some improvised device. It was a prototype. The same design they just deployed on 8862. Ramirez nodded, fingers flying across the keyboard. Which means this network ascension, they've been testing these delivery systems for years. They used war zones as labs, and your dog picked up the pattern before we had a name for it. Darius turned toward the door, eyes fixed on the runway where the Lufthansa aircraft had just begun to taxi toward the secured zone. They've been perfecting silence, he muttered, building weapons that hide in plain sight. And Shadow? Ramirez asked. He's been hearing it the whole time. Darius nodded slowly. Yeah, and we didn't listen. Outside, the wind picked up, and the smell of jet fuel clung to the tarmac like fog. Shadow shifted his stance as the aircraft stopped and the jet bridge remained retracted. The door would be opened by the tactical team only when every sweep signal was clear. But Darius already knew something wasn't. Shadow's body stiffened again, his nose lifted toward the wind. No sound, no movement, but a change. A scent in the air. The wind howled across the northern edge of the JFK airfield as midnight crept over the horizon, casting the maintenance district in an eerie hush that didn't match the chaos still rippling through the command channels. Darius pulled his tactical vest tighter, scanning the line of hangars and aging warehouse units with a focused stare, as if trying to will the hidden threat to reveal itself. Beside him, Shadow sniffed the air in sharp, deliberate bursts, his posture rigid, tail held low, muscles vibrating with a kind of anticipation Darius hadn't seen since the first alert. He's on to something, Darius said into his comms. He's picking up a scent again. Ramirez's voice crackled through the earpiece. Tense. Anything specific? No idea yet, Darius replied, already following Shadow as the dog veered away from the marked service lanes and toward an older row of buildings bordering the perimeter fence. These structures, built decades ago and long since repurposed, or so the logs claimed, didn't appear on any current map. That alone made Darius's instincts tighten like a clenched fist. Shadow paused near a rusted chain-link gate, covered in half-ripped warning signs, and pushed through a gap in the fencing, moving toward a corrugated metal building with no visible entry code or electronic lock. The structure looked abandoned, layers of grime on the windows, rust bleeding from every corner. But Shadow didn't hesitate. He sprinted ahead, nose to the ground, and stopped at a side door sealed only with a rusted latch. Darius waved the team forward. Shadows pried open, and a team of agents flooded the interior with beams of tactical light. Dust swirled through the air like ash in a furnace, and the inside was as lifeless as it looked from the outside at first. Broken crates, old janitorial equipment, disassembled air filters. Nothing about the room screamed threat. But Shadow didn't stop. He moved with a kind of urgent precision, weaving through debris until he reached the far wall painted pitch black, unlike the industrial gray surrounding it. He growled low, then sat back on his haunches and stared at the wall as if waiting for someone behind it to breathe. He's alerting, Darius said. The bomb tech moved forward, scanning the surface with magnetic and thermal tools. "You're getting anomalies," the tech muttered. "Heat signatures electrical. Something's definitely back there." With a signal from Darius, 2 agents braced sledgehammers and began breaking through the wall. The echo of metal and plaster fracturing filled the air until a narrow cavity was exposed, revealing a hidden chamber no more than 10 feet deep, just wide enough to house a rack of server towers humming faintly, their indicator lights blinking in chaotic sequences. The air inside was cooler, drier, refrigerated. "Server array," one tech confirmed. "High-capacity, air-cooled. Not consumer-grade. This is a military-class rig." Darius stepped in carefully, Shadow trailing behind with ears back and nose twitching as if even now he could sense the digital rot moving through the room. On a mounted screen across the chamber, lines of code were scrolling rapidly, windows blinking in and out with speed too fast for the human eye. "They're purging," the tech said, eyes wide. "They got maybe 2 minutes." "Pull the drive," Ramirez barked. "Yank the power feed, now." "That's the thing," the tech replied, kneeling down. "The drives aren't removable. They're embedded in the frame, liquid-cooled, sealed chassis. This is custom gear." Darius glanced to Shadow, who had now placed both front paws against the base of the server rig, nose pressed to a vent line near the floor. "There's something else," he said. "He's trying to tell us where the source is." The tech followed Shadow's cue, opening the lower access panel, and there it was. A removable SSD, slick and thin, no larger than a credit card but glowing faintly at its center. "Manual transfer buffer," the tech muttered. "This is where logs are duplicated before they hit the main encryption. If we pull this now, do it," Darius ordered. "Even if it's partial, we take it." The tech disconnected the unit and dropped it into an anti-pouch, sealing it immediately. Ramirez was already calling in a forensic team to begin image recovery on site. Darius took one last look at the black wall behind them, then turned his attention back to Shadow. The dog sat quietly now, eyes scanning the chamber as if trying to decide whether the fight was truly over or just moving deeper underground. "You just found their brain," Ramirez muttered. "What's on that drive could be the entire Ascension blueprint." Darius nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere. There were still 2 pilots airborne, both flying aircraft potentially fitted with similar bombs. Whatever was in this room had been coordinating them, or worse, monitoring them live. "We need to scrub those planes," he said, "top to tail, every inch." But even as the tech team began setting up containment protocols, Shadow moved again toward the back corner of the hidden room, where a second wall, barely distinguishable from the rest, seemed to draw him like a magnet. He growled once, low and sharp, and pawed at the surface. The silence in the hidden server room fractured when Shadow's low growl echoed again, deeper and sharper this time, drawing the entire team's attention toward the back corner, where a seemingly solid wall bore a faint seam, too clean, too recent to be original construction. Darius stepped forward slowly, weapon lowered but eyes narrowing with every step. He pointed to something else, he muttered, his voice tight with anticipation toward the back corner, where Ramirez called in 2 more agents from the tactical team stationed outside, and together they pried the narrow panel loose, revealing a service corridor just wide enough for one person to slip through. Inside, the passage was dimly lit by emergency LEDs, and the stale air carried the unmistakable scent of recent movement perfume, synthetic fabric, and just beneath that, sweat and machine oil. Darius motioned for silence, then moved forward with Shadow leading the way, nose to the floor. They followed the corridor down a steep ramp past rusted ladders and inactive generators, until they reached another door, this one ajar. "You're still here," Ramirez whispered behind him. "Whoever ran that server didn't vanish." "They didn't expect us to get past the firewall," Darius replied. "They thought digital barriers were enough." Suddenly, Shadow stopped cold and lifted his head, sniffing the air, then turning sharply toward the opposite wall. He moved toward a supply closet bolted half open, and as he did, the door slammed shut. A crash sounded from within, and a second later, it burst open. A figure sprinted from the darkness, a woman in a navy blue technician's jacket, blonde hair pulled tight beneath a maintenance cap, eyes wide and feral. In her hand was a flash drive, still flickering with residual data. "Stop!" The team gave chase instantly, feet pounding against the concrete as the woman dashed through service corridors like she'd walked them her entire life. "She knows the layout," Ramirez growled. "She's not a runner, she's from inside." Darius's mind clicked. She's not just part of the network, she built this place. As they turned a sharp corner into a dim access bay, the woman reached for something inside her jacket. Darius saw the flash of steel too late. She spun, fast and brutal, lunging toward him with a serrated blade gleaming in the emergency lighting. Darius ducked to the side, raising his left forearm to block. The scream that followed wasn't human. It was the cry of instinct meeting violence, the sound of flesh meeting metal and purpose meeting sacrifice. The woman staggered back, her arm knocked off course, but not before the knife buried itself into Shadow's side, just below the ribs. Darius's world narrowed to a point. The knife clattered across the floor as Ramirez and the others moved in, restraining her with practiced efficiency. But Darius didn't follow. He was already on his knees beside Shadow, who lay breathing heavily, blood pooling fast beneath his body, staining the dusty floor a deep, horrifying red. "Stay with me," Darius whispered, hands trembling as he tore his jacket and pressed it against the wound. Shadow's eyes blinked once, twice glazed with pain but not fading. He whimpered softly, his paw twitching against Darius's thigh. "You're okay," Darius muttered. "You're okay, boy. You did good." The woman, naked Elena Vove, former military engineer, long suspected but never caught, stared at the scene in stunned silence. "He just a dog," she said hoarsely. "You risked everything for a dog?" Darius looked up, eyes blazing. "No," he said coldly. "He risked everything for me." Ramirez, pale and shaken, called for emergency medics while agents dragged Elena away. But Darius didn't move. He stayed crouched, one hand holding pressure on Shadow's wound, the other pressed against the shepherd's trembling chest. He could feel the heartbeat, faint, irregular, but there, still fighting. "Hang in there, soldier," Darius whispered, his voice cracking. "You don't get to check out now, not when we're this close." Outside, the screech of approaching wheels signaled the arrival of the paramedic team. Darius gently lifted Shadow's upper body, cradling him like a fallen brother. "Easy," the lead medic said. "We've got him." But Darius didn't let go, not until he saw the IV line in, the stretcher secured, and Shadow's eyes flickered open just long enough to meet his. It wasn't just pain Darius saw there. It was purpose. The dog knew what he had done, knew what it meant. The interior of the makeshift command post buzzed with frantic urgency, voices overlapping through radio chatter, the blinking lights of surveillance monitors casting moving shadows across the blood-speckled concrete floor. Shadow's stretcher had just been loaded into the waiting tactical ambulance, his breathing shallow, his coat matted with blood that hadn't yet dried. Darius stood outside the vehicle, knuckles white on the handle of the back door, unwilling to let go, heart still pounding from the seconds that had nearly cost them everything. But something about Elena's expression lingered in his mind, less panic, more resignation, like someone who had failed not just an escape but a mission she hadn't expected to complete. Back inside the corridor, Ramirez was supervising the sweep of the last room behind the server chamber when Darius returned, eyes hollow but sharp. "There's something we missed," he said tightly, brushing past agents and stepping back into the hallway where Elena had first appeared. Her jacket, discarded during the struggle, lay half-crumpled on the floor near the baseboard. The pocket seams had been hastily re-sewn. He dropped to one knee and slid his fingers along the inner lining. Nothing. Then, just under the left breast pocket, his thumb caught a stiffer ridge beneath the fabric. He reached for his knife and sliced carefully across the seam. A thin plastic envelope emerged, no larger than a business card inside. A MADACT micro-SD chip glinted faintly under the overhead bulb. Darius froze. "Ramirez," he called, holding it up. "She had the blueprint on her." "That's not just a field key. That's a vault driver." "Meaning?" Darius asked, already knowing the answer. "Meaning this contains access credentials, routing architecture, and layered intel. Not just data about the Ascension operation, but about the entire back-end structure of their global net," Ramirez said. "Echelon." Darius's throat went dry. "That's the name Andre muttered," he said. "Said we were only seeing the surface." Ramirez nodded. "Echelon isn't just Ascension's arm, it's the brain. The architecture. At that moment, one of the medical staff stepped into the corridor, face pale. "Agent Cole, we need to go. Shadow's fading fast. If we don't get him to the emergency unit in 10 minutes, he won't make it." Darius hesitated, the chip still warm in his palm, brain torn between duty and the living, breathing reason he'd made it this far. And then he heard it, barely audible claws scraping faintly against the concrete just outside the far threshold. He turned slowly. Shadow was there, not standing, crawling, blood still leaking from his side, legs shaking, eyes glassy but focused. "Jesus," the medic whispered. "But how is he moving?" Darius dropped to the ground, reaching forward, but Shadow kept crawling slow, excruciating, every breath a struggle, and clenched delicately in his mouth. Just between his blood-slicked teeth was the exact same micro-SD chip Darius had just found. Darius blinked. "No way," he breathed. He looked down at the one in his hand, then back at the second, now resting gently on the floor where Shadow had placed it, right at Darius's boot. Ramirez knelt beside him, stunned. "Two chips, one decoy," Darius nodded slowly, "or one back door." Elena tried to bury the real one on Shadow's blind side, but he knew where it was before any of us did. Shadow gave one small, wheezing huff, then collapsed fully to the ground, his head resting against Darius's boot. Darius reached down, cupping the dog's head in both hands, pressing his forehead gently to Shadow's. "You stubborn bastard," he whispered. "You weren't gonna let her get away with anything, were you?" Behind him, medics moved again, carefully lifting Shadow onto the stretcher, this time with Ramirez's help. The two chips were secured separately in lead cases, one for encryption analysis, the other for cross-verification. As the ambulance doors slammed shut, Darius climbed in beside Shadow, keeping a hand on the shepherd's flank, feeling every shallow breath, every slowing heartbeat. "We've got it," he whispered. "Because of you." In the distance, alarms blared anew as Terminal Control issued evacuation protocols for the other flagged flight. But in that moment, the only sound that mattered was the faint thump of Shadow's heart against his palm, still holding on, refusing to let go. 3 weeks later, the quiet inside the Homeland Security Strategic Operations Center in Virginia felt almost unnatural, as if even the polished floors and glass-paneled walls were holding their breath. The long mahogany conference table, normally cluttered with coffee-stained folders and encrypted laptops, was bare today, save for a single velvet case placed neatly at its center, embossed with the national seal. Rows of officials in tailored suits and uniformed command staff filled the seats like statues, backs straight, expressions solemn, eyes forward. No cameras, no press. Just presence. Just memory. Darius stood in the far corridor, still as stone, dressed in a fitted dark suit for the first time since he could remember, the metal on his chest gleaming softly under the recessed lights. Beside him stood Shadow, recovered but bearing the marks of his sacrifice. His left side had been shaved for surgery, the stitches now removed but still visible beneath the brown and fur that had once been untouched. A small brace supported his rear left leg, but he walked with quiet dignity, head held high. When the double doors opened, the room turned to them, not out of obligation but instinct. Respect that no uniform could command, only actions could earn. Darius didn't speak immediately. He walked forward in silence, every step measured, the soft echo of Shadow's pause following like a second heartbeat. When they reached the center of the room, he turned, nodded once toward the director at the podium, and waited. The director cleared his throat but offered no speech, only a gesture toward the open space. "Agent Cole," he said simply, "you have the floor." Darius looked down at Shadow, then out across the room, eyes sweeping across the faces of generals, legislators, analysts, and operatives, every one of them trained to identify threats, but few of them prepared to recognize the invisible con. "You didn't save the world," Darius began, his voice quiet, steady, low like a steady drumbeat beneath the skin. "We stopped 3 planes, we found a network, we bought time." A long pause followed, but no one moved. "But the reason I'm standing here, why any of us are, isn't because of protocol or clearance, or some shiny badge. It's because of him." Darius gestured down to Shadow, who now sat obediently, eyes alert, chest proud despite the scar. He didn't carry a gun. He didn't log intel. He didn't speak a single word. But he listened better than any of us. He felt what we missed, and he acted when we hesitated. The silence held. Darius's voice deepened slightly, emotion threading into the edges now. Shadow wasn't trained for this kind of operation. He wasn't certified for advanced threat detection or covert tracking. In fact, he was almost dismissed. They said he was too analytical, that he hesitated. He looked up at the wall of brass in silence. But what they called hesitation, I call instinct, precision, thought. He didn't act fast, he acted right. A ripple passed through the room. Nothing audible, just something intangible shifting. A collective inhale of something raw. When I froze, Darius continued, voice now firm, unwavering. He moved. When I doubted, he believed, and when a blade was aimed for my heart, you call them K9 units, Darius said softly. We assign them numbers, serials, roles. But they are not machines. They are not tools. Partners, sentinels. And sometimes, they are the best of us. The room remained still, reverent, as if even the air didn't dare interrupt. But Shadow didn't ask for medals. He didn't sign up for politics or strategy. He just did what we're all supposed to do. He stood between danger and the innocent. He moved forward when it would have been easier to stand still. Darius stepped back, letting the words settle into the quiet. Then, reaching into the velvet box, he retrieved the small, glinting medallion, an honorary Homeland Security Medal of Valor, awarded only twice before to non-human recipients. He crouched beside Shadow and clipped it gently to the front of the shepherd's custom K9 harness. The applause didn't come like a wave. It came like a heartbeat, slow, deliberate, real. Hands meeting in quiet rhythm, rising gradually, not for spectacle but for something deeper, a truth that demanded recognition. In the stillness between those claps, Shadow lifted his head and pressed his nose gently against the badge pinned to Darius's lapel, the same spot where a matching medal had been placed minutes earlier. A soft, almost inaudible exhale left the dog's nostrils as he held that contact. And Darius, he bent forward slowly, wrapped both arms around his partner's neck, and pressed his forehead to Shadow's. You kept me alive, he whispered so only Shadow could hear. Not just in that hangar, but every goddamn day. Shadow blinked, once, and let out a slow breath that felt like release. He didn't need applause. He didn't need words. He had done his duty, and more than that, he had given a part of himself that no algorithm, no protocol, no encryption key could replicate. He had offered his loyalty, his body, and in the end, his blood. Darius stood up slowly, a tear catching in the corner of his eye that he didn't bother wiping away. Kill the sky, he said, voice barely above a whisper. But you keep my soul. And in that moment, under a ceiling of fluorescent lights and national flags, between polished shoes and solemn hands, a warrior with 4 paws and a stitched side became more than just a partner. He became a legend, a quiet guardian, the sentinel no one saw but who saw everything. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments what was the moment that hit you the hardest. Was it when Shadow threw himself in harm's way, or when he delivered the final piece of evidence before collapsing? We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Drop your city and country below, your voice matters here. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us continue sharing the quiet courage of those who stand between danger and the rest of us. Sometimes on 2 legs, sometimes on 4. Hit like, hit sub, and share this with someone who believes instinct is the most powerful intelligence of all.